Chapter 1. The dominant empires of the world prior to Islam. The Roman Empire. The eastern part of the Roman Empire was known as the Byzantine Empire, which ruled over, among other lands, Asia, Syria, Palestine, Egypt, and northern Africa, and its capital was Constantinople. It was a wicked empire that subjected its citizens to oppression and wrongdoing. As is almost always the case when an occupying foreign force rules over the native inhabitants of a land, violent tactics were employed to bring the population under control. The empire showed no mercy to the populations they ruled. So desperate did the economic situation become for Syria's inhabitants that people would sell their children and use the proceeds of the sale to pay off their debts. The Byzantines lived lives that were replete with contradictions. On the one hand, religion was deeply ingrained in people's minds, and monasticism was widespread. In fact, it was not uncommon for a common man to enter into deeply arcane religious research. But on the other hand, the population had become engrossed in frivolous and often outright evil forms of entertainment. Stadiums that could accommodate 80,000 spectators were built. The main sporting events that took place in them consisted of gladiators fighting one another to death, and at times gladiators were even pitted against predatory animals. While such sport was the entertainment of the common man, and while unspeakably cruel punishment was his lot if he committed an offense, the rulers in higher classes lived lives of opulence and decadence. The Persian Empire. The Persian Empire was greater and stronger than the Byzantine Empire. False religions such as Zoroastrianism and Mithras dominated the lands of Persia. The kings of Persia, the crown, were passed from father to son, were extremely corrupt. They acted with impunity because they believed themselves to have been descended from their gods. Anything that was produced in Persia became the property of the kings, who would spend what came to them with almost unimaginable extravagance. Many farmers left their lands and sought refuge in places of worship, fleeing either from exorbitant taxes or forced entry to the army. For the people of Persia were used as mere pawns in the wars that would intermittently be waged between the Persian Empire and the Byzantine Empire. And of course, the citizens had nothing to benefit from such wars. It was only the kings who stood to gain profit. India. Before the advent of Islam, at around the beginning of the 6th century of the Vishnu calendar, India was immersed in ignorance. Obscene acts, which were considered holy by India's inhabitants, were perpetrated in houses of worship. Women were considered to be of no value. Then many women would burn themselves to death upon the death of their husbands, clearly indicated their standing in society. And if a woman did live on after her husband's death, it was forbidden for her to remarry. India was isolated from the world, which of course led to widespread ignorance. Its inhabitants forced upon themselves absurdly strict dietary rules, and those who were considered outcasts in society were forced to live outside the boundaries of the city. Supported by political and religious law, the caste system made a clear distinction between the various classes of society. At the top of the hierarchy were the Brahmins, priests and scholars, then the Kshatriyas, warriors and rulers, then the Vaishyas, merchants, traders, farmers, and lastly, the Shudras, artisans, laborers, servants, and slaves. The law gave the Brahmins the right to act with impunity. As for the Sudras, they did not have the right to own property, to sit alongside Brahmins, or to read religious books. There was another caste whose members were ranked beneath the Sudras. They were called the Untouchables, and they were forced to do hard, menial, and highly unpleasant labor. A synopsis of the dominant religions of the world prior to the advent of Islam. Before the advent of Islam, human beings were living through one of the worst periods of human history. The line of prophets from the descendants of Isaac, peace be upon him, come to an end, with the ascension of Jesus, peace be upon him, to heavens. In the centuries that followed, belief in the Trinity gained more and more acceptance among Christians. Until around the beginning of the 6th century, only a handful of people still believed in the Islamically monotheistic teachings of Jesus, peace be upon him. The entire world was engulfed in darkness. Describing the period, Seerah of Allah, peace be upon him, said, "Verily, Allah looked at the inhabitants of the world, despised both the Arabs and foreigners among them, except for some remnants from people of the book." Polytheism and idol worship had become widespread. Some people apostatized from the religion. Others didn't follow any religion at all, other than ritualistic acts of worship they performed to idols. And others believed in a distorted form of a divinely revealed religion. In short, almost all of the inhabitants of Earth were living in a state of darkness and ignorance. As for the Jews, their religion had become a soulless set of rituals, and had become greatly influenced by neighboring nations or by nations that had subjugated. And so the Jews took from the many of their polytheistic beliefs and practices, as one Jewish scholar put it, that the prophets were constantly furious about idol worship proves that the concepts of idol worship and polytheism had crept their way into the souls of the children of Israel. There were people who entertained superstitious and polytheistic beliefs, and the Talmud attests to the fact that the Jews were strongly attracted to the idea of idol worship. Judaism had reached its nadir just prior to the prophet of Muhammad, peace be upon him. The revealed scriptures that Jews had with them had become greatly distorted, and as a result, contained many false notions about Allah's father. As for Christianity, distortions and false interpretations corrupted its pristine teachings so that it no longer remained a religion of pure monotheism. Many polytheistic practices with the concept of Trinity, of course, at forefront became established Christian doctrine. Jesus, peace be upon him, came to invite people to the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and no. But polytheism was deeply ingrained in the souls of the people to whom he, peace be upon him, was sent, so that soon after his time various polytheistic beliefs were being disseminated, all in the name of Christianity. If a Christian man was martyred, others attributed divine qualities to him and built little statues of him, people who began to worship saints and martyrs, holding a status not very different from the idols of the Quraysh. Saints were considered to be intermediaries between Christians and God. It was in the 4th century that the Trinity became the official doctrine of the Church. But it is only recently, in the latter half of the 19th century, that the process through which Trinity became doctrine was made public. Magianism was also widespread at the beginning of the 6th century. Magians were known to have worshipped the elements, mainly fire. Houses of fire worship had been built in various places. Inside those houses, people would pray and follow a strict set of guidelines and etiquettes. Outside, they were free to do as they pleased, so that, in essence, there was no real difference between Magians and people who did not adhere to any religion. The duties of Magian priests involved worshipping the sun 4 times a day. They also worshipped the moon, fire, and water. As priests, they followed a strict code of hygiene. It was their task to make sure that the fires in houses of worship never became extinguished and never came in contact with water. The Magians of Iran turned towards fire when they prayed, and the last of the kings, Yazdgerd, once swore by the sun and said, "I swear by the sun, which is the greatest God." Although Magianism is clouded by a great deal of mystery, it seems that one unifying belief among Magians of all centuries is belief in 2 gods, one being the god of light or goodness, and the other being the god of darkness or evil. Buddhism was practiced in India and Middle Asia. Adherents of Buddhism carried idols wherever they went, and they were known for having built many temples. Anywhere that Buddha traveled, statues were erected in his honor. The original religion of India was Brahmanism, which was an ancient form of Hinduism. Without a doubt, both Hinduism and Buddhism were and are polytheistic religions. Around the time when the Prophet, peace be upon him, was about to be sent to mankind as a warner and bearer of glad tidings, the people of the world were drowning in the mires of polytheism. It was as if members of each religion, Christians, Jews, Buddhists, and Brahmins, were competing with one another to see who could best glorify false deities. The Prophet, peace be upon him, alluded to that widespread state of ignorance during one of his sermons. Lo, verily my Lord commanded me to teach you what you are ignorant of, from that which He has taught me on this day of mine. All of the wealth that I have bestowed upon a slave is lawful, and I have indeed created my slaves hunafa. Devils indeed came to them, have taken them away from their religion, and have made forbidden upon them that which I have made lawful for them, and have ordered them to associate as partner to me that with which I have not sent down any authority. And indeed, Allah looked at the inhabitants of earth and despised them, both the Arabs and foreigners among them, except for some remnants from the people of the book.